Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a test. This is an actual podcast. It's been a while, and the last time I did a podcast, this is Talk Junkie. I am Justin Perkins. The last time I did a podcast, I flirted with the notion that it would be my last podcast. Now, there were multiple reasons for that. Some of it just sheer scheduling. So many people like myself their lives have changed dramatically over the last almost a year at this point. 8 months, 9 months. And work has been sporadic and back and forth, different jobs, and the last position I took running a crew for a company to do a slip. It was 7 days a week. It was, I was up 10 to 5 every morning. I was a little later in the evening coming home, and there was a lot of stress, and it was a different situation for me than I'd been in. Thank goodness for the cough button, or you guys would be in misery by now. But it was a different deal for me, and I really didn't have time. I had time, I just didn't make time. It also was closer to home. I wasn't traveling as much. I record these almost exclusively as I travel. So that had an impact on the number of attempts I made to come back, which until today was currently 0. But the reason before that was content. What am I going to do podcasts about? How often am I going to do them? People who know me go, well, Justin sitting down and talking for 45 minutes is easy. It would be more impressive for him to shut up for 45-minute intervals. And understandably, that's mostly correct. The thing is, to sit down and do one of these podcasts, you have to put some effort into it, some time into it. Some of these require research. Some of them require sitting down and kind of thinking out a game plan. A lot of them, admittedly, a large majority of them, I just wing it. I just get on and go, much like this one. But the biggest thing is you have to have some sort of passion for it, some sort of desire to do it. And in turn, it has to appeal to people, or don't want to listen, and you're kind of just talking to yourself. I hit a really good stride where I was getting interaction, and apparently something was appealing to somebody. I'd picked up new listeners, and this is the important part. I'd picked up listeners I did not know personally. And I was getting communication from them. I was getting emails. We actually, myself and one of those listeners, came up with a communication system. I'd flirted with Facebook page and all these things I'd done to sell books and stuff in the past, and the issue with that had always been it didn't seem personal, one. I had my issues with social media, too, and it kind of always de-evolves into this just shit-posting opinions. Sorry, I generally don't cuss, and I forgot the beep button. But it's not something that's usually productive. But, in person is always better, and that wasn't an option. So, writing letters, it takes effort to sit down and write something. It gives you a chance to think about it. Gives you a chance to read it, reestablish your true feelings on something, to think about it. And so myself and one of the listeners came up with an ideal. When we communicate, let's communicate via email. Write the email, read it, put it in your drafts, come back to it 30 minutes later, an hour later, a day later. Read it and see if it still reflects how you feel, how you actually feel, or what you actually believe instead of what you felt in the moment, or if you were upset or heated. And then, and only then, hit send. And when you receive an email, and I receive an email from a listener, or I receive, if it's not simply a question, or if it's not just fraught with negativity, it's an actual focused statement and something that has substance and has value to it, something that someone's put time and consideration into. Not that they have to write this essay. It doesn't matter to the level of quality in that regard. It's that you can tell it means something to them and that they have a real feeling and that they've taken time with this, that they've thought about this, and this is a true feeling. This isn't just something you're hiding behind a screen name or something to type. And then read it and consider it, even if you disagree with it. And that became very productive. It was 6 of us, at times 8, but mostly 6 of us, constantly doing that. And I will admit, for the most part, the 5 or 6 of you that's continued to know that's went on since the show's not been on. And a lot of you are very responsible for this podcast and for me choosing to go forward and continue to do things, especially Malik. Malik has sent very thoughtful and very encouraging statements, but he's also sent things that challenged me and not attacked but addressed faults in how I've done things, statements I made, and really addressed this whole giving up and just not doing it. Now, one of the biggest reasons for that lack of passion and that lack of desire to do the podcast, and there's multiple ones. I'm going to cite 3 main issues with what kind of led to me stepping away for a while. One is my recording setup and how I'm using this through Spreaker. And this is not a knock on Spreaker. Spreaker runs their ads. I get a lot of downloads for what I'm doing. Not a lot in regards to what a successful podcast would be. But considering what I'm doing and the level I'm doing it at, for me, I'm very happy. Especially with the amount of downloads I get on Spreaker, because Spreaker does help spread the podcast. They handle the advertisements before and after the podcast. Let me state this, and I'm willing to show my financial records. I've made not one dime off of the podcast. I don't know what the issue is, if I got a setting wrong, whatever, but that's not why I started to do it, and that's not an issue for me. On the other hand, I do have money invested into the podcast. $7 a month for one, and then the recording setup I bought that I don't use. I bought 4 mics and a mixing board and headphones and a splitter and all these things that I don't use. I use a phone and a set of headphones. But I'm limited to under an hour, 45 minutes, I believe, without further financial investment. And a lot of times I feel like I want to go over an hour. The other thing is, it's not impossible, nor is it extremely hard to have a guest on via Spreaker. It does involve me getting out the laptop. It does involve me using Skype, I believe. And I've tried it with one guest as a test run, my wife. It didn't work to the level that I was satisfied with. I feel that the podcast would be much better with the occasional guest. I've got a friend, Brian. I don't know if he still listens, but he very much wanted to come on and be a guest, and talk about some things. I would like to have had him on. We played in a band together in high school. We now live a long way apart. And I just... It's not convenient to do it via Spreaker. So that's one issue, is the service. Now, to address that, at some point going forward, this podcast will move from Spreaker to Anchor. I can monetize it through Anchor. I can handle the advertisements better through Anchor. And I can have unlimited guests, or at least multiple guests. I've been on a very good podcast I enjoyed so much doing, Raving Television Addict, that was done through Anchor, and we were able to have, I think we had 4 on one night, and it was well done. Richard Holland, Brad, the one that done the podcast, he does really good. He does good production. It's a funny show. It's a... Having done a podcast myself, I realized he put a lot of work into that podcast, and I was highly impressed with it, and I really enjoyed it, and I'd like to have that type of atmosphere on my podcast, and I feel that moving to Anchor would allow that. The issue is I don't want to lose the back catalog of what I've done, and I want to keep the name. I want to move everything over, and I've looked into that process. It seems like I'm going to be able to do that, so it looks like I will be moving it on to Anchor. That back catalog may not mean a whole lot to certain people, but it does to me, because it kind of gives me an idea where I started from, and some of those I feel were really good podcasts, and I enjoyed doing them. Now, the second issue with not doing this podcast was obviously time and ability. It's something I have to make time for. It's something I have to do. One, I don't have to do a podcast every day, and that's something that, some people are like, I want the podcast every day. And I've seen that time issue. I have a friend named Brandon who done a podcast, also via Anchor. I never got to do it, but we had talked about me going on and doing it a little bit. He's a very intelligent person, and a polar opposite to me in a lot of belief structure, and someone that I just immensely enjoy speaking with, and doing his podcast. I've done Raving Television Addict with him a lot, and I think he would add tremendously to my podcast if I could have him on as a guest. I think that his point of view and his perspective on things would do nothing but increase the value of my podcast. I did a podcast with a gentleman named Joey Krager, an extremely funny person, and somebody I'd like to have on. I've done some other podcasts regarding the book, and all of those have been, I've been on with a host, at least 2 people, and I think that adds to it. But I've always used the excuse, well, I don't have time. I don't have time to coordinate this and that. I do. It's something that if I want to do it and I do enjoy doing it, then I have to put that time in. That's on me. So those first 2 issues can be remedied, and they're on me. The third issue, very multi-tiered. You have to have the passion to do the podcast. And, when I do the podcast over movies or music or things like that, those are very easy for me to get passionate about, and they seem to do very well with the people I know personally. My friend Mandy, I know, would prefer the music podcasts, and those type of podcasts 10 to 1 over anything else. And I do enjoy doing it. I don't enjoy it to the point that it could be all I do. And, some of my podcasts are thought experiments, and I enjoy those greatly. I think those would be enhanced by having guests on. A lot of them may be statement pieces that when I do them, I feel self-righteous and conceited because you're only getting my point of view on the topic, and that's not best for conversation. It's not best to get the people engaged that are listening. And, it's good for indoctrination. It's good for an echo chamber, but it's not good for real thought and real discussion. So you have to have that passion. And I noticed that some of my podcasts were leaning politically to a point that I was talking about a lot of political stuff, and I didn't want to be a political podcast. I did, but I wanted that to be separate from Talk Junkie, because I didn't want to admit that was a part of me, that political beliefs and thoughts and things of that nature were a part of me, and very few people share my political beliefs, so I felt alienated, I thought. Now, one thing that I've got from listeners like Malik, and really those, and I don't name everyone because not everyone wants to be named, but that core of people that I'm corresponding with, it is very political, and it leans very political. And they have political point of views, many opposing mine, some in agreement with mine, but I thought, I can't do a political podcast. I can't let that be a part of this because that's not what I want. And so I started saying, okay, I got to get back away from this political stuff and start brainstorming, because ideas come pretty frequent for this podcast for me, especially if you look at the amount of shows. We're already at 100 shows, and really, with the exception of the very first episode, which was meant to be something else for a different podcast, those were done this physical year. So I was turning out content, but I'd got to a point to where I'd not expressed some of the stuff I wanted to because it was too political. And I found that my passion at the time, then, when I kind of stopped doing these podcasts, and my passion now is somewhat political. And that's not to say that every podcast from here on out would be political, but I have to tap that passion when it's there, regardless of what it may be. So, for me, if it was not going to be a political podcast, I could not continue on. Now, for the namesake of this podcast, if you're looking at it and you see Fear and Loathing in Cincy, what changed my mind about the podcast and what I would do was a trip I made this past Friday to Cincinnati. We buy and resell things. When I'm not working, my father buys, I buy. Nothing major, just a couple extra bucks here and there. I was in Cincinnati. I was in a warehouse waiting to be loaded. People everywhere. Two gentlemen are sitting in front of me waiting to be checked out. There's a loading dock, and then there's a regular checkout. I had pallets of things that I needed to get loaded. They had some refrigerators they needed to get loaded, so we're waiting in this line to be checked out and be able to get out this bay door instead of going out the main entrance. A lot of people. This place is heavily populated at this point in time. A lot of people are doing what we do on the side. Some people do it for a living. The two gentlemen in front of me are talking 10 foot away. One of them looks at me and says, young man, I'm almost 40, but this gentleman is 52. His name is Derek. And the gentleman with him is 44. His name is Marquise. And Derek looks at me and says, do you mind if I ask you a politically driven question? And I said, no, sir, I don't. And he said, this is a question not a lot of people would like to answer, but if you don't want to, that's fine. But I think, political discussion is important. I kind of know to some degree where this conversation is going to go, because these gentlemen have some paperwork with them, and they're talking to other people as they come by. Derek looks at me and he goes, would you tell me who you voted for president? that's a question that my wife and I discuss. You know, so that's a topic that I would discuss with close friends, but it's not something that I've been really public about, and it's not something I think most people would know about me necessarily. And I told him that to that degree, and I said, but I will tell you, I said, I fear that you won't like the response, but I'll tell you. And he said, it'd surprise you, I'm fairly open-minded. I said, well, myself, I voted for Joe Jorgensen. And he said, can you tell me why? And I said, the biggest reason to me is a two-part answer. One, I don't believe that the president really affects much in the country. And two, I don't really see a whole lot of difference between the two gentlemen running. And secondly, I'd like that option to one day have a third party. I said, I live in Kentucky, and Kentucky's going to go the way Kentucky's going to go regardless of how I vote, but I like to represent that third party that someday, possibly, it can get some steam to it, even though I don't agree with everything they say. And if I might add, I believe in no way, shape, and form of the idiocracy of the lesser evil. It's one of the most ignorant statements I've ever heard in my life. And Derek said, I'm going to tell you something that would surprise you. And I said, I doubt that, but just because I've been privy to the conversations you've had with other people. See, Derek and Marquise are African-American gentlemen. Derek said, I voted for Donald Trump. He said, it's the second Republican presidential vote I've made for a Republican since, I think he was 24, 25, somewhere in there. He didn't vote his first election. He said, I voted against Barack Obama his second term. And I voted for Donald Trump this term. He said, I live here in Cincinnati. He said, I can take you to the street I'm from, a predominantly African-American street. He said, and I can take you to very few people who voted for Joe Biden. He said, I can take you to a Cuban area where my wife is from, in Pennsylvania. A very small Cuban population where she's from, who did not vote for Joe Biden. He said, I didn't vote for the lesser of two evils. He said, but I didn't vote because I like Donald Trump. He said, I voted that way because of who and what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are. He gave me his political beliefs, and he had quite a bit of documentation to use as emphasis. The Crime Bill Act of 94, 96, whatever it was. Pelosi's support, and Biden and Obama's support, of the Patriot Act, which was put into place by his least favorite of all presidents, George W. Bush. He also mentioned to me something, First Step Act, or some, and it's not something I've been able to verify. Look, people have a tendency to believe that if a white man does something that seems out of character voting-wise, and they give you a reason why, that you simply believe it because of that. Or if an African-American gentleman does something that's out of character voting-wise and gives you information, you should believe it. I don't believe that. I don't know what this law is that supposedly Trump passed that is good for nonviolent offenders, and it's a step in the right direction away from this crime bill. And I will also say that Donald Trump himself did not do that, whatever it is. It requires House and Senate pass. But whatever. He went on to explain that he simply would have voted and let it lie and probably never been interested in the situation again. But he felt that President Trump was being cheated and that the election was rigged, and that was due to personal experience he had via a family member who was a pollster. Again, something I cannot confirm. Also, something that I would not call him a liar about. He seemed very legitimately concerned about this, and he seemed like an honest man. Now, I told him my personal beliefs, and there's a podcast coming up about stealing elections that I'm going to speak about. I do believe that the election was fraught with corruption, much like the last election was, and the election before that. To me, what the DNC did 4 years ago to Bernie Sanders was true election manipulation. I don't believe necessarily that it was as bad in this presidential election, in that it's definitely there, but I don't know that it's enough that it would have made a difference. Maybe it would. I don't know that. He had some statistics and some things to show me that, one of which I did see later on, that he feels is concrete evidence. I don't know. And I explained to him, I was hesitant to tell you who I voted for, not because I assumed you voted for Trump or I assumed you voted for Biden, but because a lot of people don't like the third-party option. And I told him about the podcast, and I hope that he's listening today. He said he was going to check out the past episodes, and I told him that I really thought I would like to have him on the podcast at some point, and that I wanted to do a podcast about meeting him, because at the end of our discussion, which lasted about an hour, I determined that I could do a political podcast when I wanted to do a political podcast, and it was okay. We spoke for a long time. He didn't sway me in my belief that I voted correctly. I didn't attempt to sway him in his belief that he voted correctly. Because I believe that I voted correctly because I voted with what I thought was right. And I believe that he voted with what he thought was right. Now, he had statistic upon statistic how African Americans voted much more in favor of Trump than one they were polled. I've never paid any attention to polls. They're a ridiculous thing. I've always believed they mostly poll dumb people, so I don't pay a whole lot of attention to polls. I understand Cuban Americans are going to vote Republican. It's a misunderstanding of socialism and what it is to be a socialist and what it is to be a Democrat. A lot of people like to say they want to protect the democracy of America. You don't live in a democracy. So a lot of people are ill-informed on that, and I can understand the past experiences of Cubans and where they come from and why they have the thoughts they have. I live in eastern Kentucky, and we did have an interruption in the recording, another issue I have with Spreaker on my phone. I live in eastern Kentucky, and people in eastern Kentucky seem to overwhelmingly have voted for Mitch McConnell, a gentleman who has never done anything for eastern Kentucky. I, again, openly and proudly in this instance, voted for Barron, a third party, because I had no faith in either of the two candidates running on the major tickets. But in that regard, Mitch McConnell won, and I think that's very similar in a lot of ways to the Cuban situation, with the Cuban voters feeling they have to vote a certain way because of things that aren't true. And not to say that they shouldn't vote Republican, but I don't feel that people in Eastern Kentucky should vote for Mitch McConnell just because Mitch McConnell says, I'm for coal. And that's a podcast in and of itself. But my conversation with these two gentlemen opened up a lot. And I explained to them, I don't really talk politics, and this is why. And Derek, who did not vote for Trump and now wishes he did because he feels like they're stealing the election away from someone, and he just wants a legal, fair winner. Said he thought I was fairly open-minded and easy to discuss politics with. And I said, I can be. I said, but there's times when I can't be. There's times when I have beliefs so strong that they're not open. They're pretty concrete. I get physically ill when someone tells me I'm voting for Trump because he's protecting my freedoms. I get physically ill when someone tells me I'm voting for Biden because he cares about African American voters and he cares about LGBTQ voters. And I get physically ill when someone tells me I'm voting for the lesser of two evils. Because all three of those statements are provably false. Unequivocally, provably false. They're not true. Marquise went on to explain to me that his biggest issue with Biden was Kamala Harris. And the racist notion that if you didn't vote for her as a black voter because she was black, you were what he called an Uncle Tom. He felt forced to vote for an African American like he felt forced to vote for Obama the second time because they were of the same race, and that he would be racist for not doing so, which to him was ridiculous because that made him racist. It was a racist statement to say that. And he felt her record in office and what she did to innocent men in jail and what she did predominantly to African American men made her unvotable. Now, I would say that if you change nothing about Kamala Harris's record, if she did all the things that she did, and you just changed the D to an R in front of her name and put her on a Republican ticket, her being, for all intents and purposes, a member of law enforcement, for her record with court cases, for all these things, she could be a dominant Republican candidate. President Biden, soon to be President Biden, former vice president, is moderate on many things. Definitely not the socialist he's made out to be. And when he was not mentally incompetent, not a very liberal person at all. I mean, real liberal, not the liberal that the Democratic Party has hijacked, not the liberal that right-wing nutcases talk about. I mean real liberal. He's not a real liberal. Donald Trump's like shooting fish in a barrel. That's an easy target in so many ways. the lack of class he handled the voter fraud with alone is enough to turn somebody's stomach. But I talked to these gentlemen for a long time, and I explained to them why I'd quit doing the podcast, and it was at their encouragement that I felt I have something to say. And it's not what everybody else has to say. It's not the same thing, but more important is what I have to say. It's a discussion that I enjoy having, and it's things that I enjoy addressing. So why would I not partake in that? Why would I restrict myself from that? Because I don't want to be labeled one way or the other. People are going to label you the way they're going to label you. All of my friends that are left-leaning, I really, really believe wholeheartedly that I'm a Republican purist. And all the friends that I have that are right-leaning believe wholeheartedly that I'm a leftist. I had one friend tell me that the fact that I listened to Rage Against the Machine, whether I agreed with everything they said or not, was proof that not only did I accept the leftist agenda, but pushed it. An idiotic statement, but one that was made regardless. And I thought about that and thought, I'm being labeled either way. This is an important part of America at this point in time, and regardless of what I have to say, I won't affect it in any way. But at least I can speak my mind and do something I enjoy and talk about something I am at least passionate about. And I should not ever have a fear of being labeled. If I'm going to be labeled, I should at least express myself. See, I want the death of the two-party system. I want to not ever have to hear the lesser of two evils. I want the best that the Republican Party can offer. I want the best that the Democrats can offer. I want the best that the Libertarians can offer. I want the best that the Independents can offer. I would love to see the rise of a truly centrist, moderate party. I'd like to see a 4-party system, 5-party system. I would like to see issues that are not of and for the government to be taken out of the hands of the government. Issues of love and relationship. Issues of medical care. But more than anything, I would like to see the American government and the American president be held responsible for the running of the country and the representation of its people. And I would like to actually see them be able to do that. One of the biggest labels I was always afraid to be stuck with is conspiracy theorist. For what reason, I don't know, but it has the most negative of all connotations. I don't believe we bombed the World Trade Centers. I do believe the CIA killed Kennedy. I do not believe the President of the United States of America runs our country. Nor does the House or the Senate. I believe they simply fight over the ability to make money for the people who pull their strings. And I believe that our support and our following of them is simply to keep us divided and unaware. I believe completely and totally, with no sense of irony, not joking in any way, shape, or form. I believe wholeheartedly that not only does the deep state, the military-industrial complex, and the CIA run and control our country, but that it is provable on all counts. We've got a couple episodes coming up about election fraud and an episode coming up about Kennedy. 2 episodes that I would not have done 6 months ago. 2 episodes that I would not have done 2 weeks ago. 2 episodes that I feel very passionate about and I want to do. This election was stolen. Stolen from the American people. If I just wrote down the beliefs of the candidates, their real beliefs, if I just wrote down their actions, things that they have supported, things that they have done, you could not tell the difference between Barack Obama and George Bush if I take away 1-2 topics. You couldn't tell the difference between Biden and Trump. And on the few areas where there's actual differences, you would not be able, because of bias, to accurately tell me which candidate believed which way. Children separated from families and put in cages. Well, that's obviously Donald Trump. Statistically, that's Barack Obama. Choking out whistleblowers and making it harder for whistleblowers to get fair representation in court, and drone bombing at excessive rates. That's clearly a combination of President Bush and Donald Trump. But actually, that's Barack Obama. And it's not to pick on Barack Obama. For as bad of a person as I think he was, I don't think Trump's any better. A lot of instances worse. But those are unpopular statements because they're attacks on people who you've been made false idols to you, people who you believe to be good people. And that's the problem. That's the issue. Trump supporters really believe Trump's a good person. Biden supporters really believe Biden's a good person. You just both happen to be inaccurate. And the statistics and the numbers and the facts prove that. But we don't live in a factual world anymore. So facts don't really seem to matter. I'm going to do political episodes. I'm going to do music episodes. I'm going to do whatever I want to do. And I'm going to be happy about it. And hopefully soon I'm going to have other voices on with me and have conversations. And hopefully listening to this doesn't make you think, well, he is a far left nut job or he is a far right fanatic. Hopefully it makes you think, this guy thinks differently than I think, or this guy thinks similarly to what I think. And if nothing else, I should hear him out. So, I'm back.